Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
Now it's time to take a breather. I can't keep this up. This is my dream job, and I have a lot of fun doing it. I know I'm incredibly lucky, but a dream job is still a job, and it's a job that keeps getting bigger and more complicated. I'm so tired. There's nothing in my life right now except work. I did get close to burning out, but fortunately I always knew when to step back from the brink. And it's not like I can drop the quality back down. That's not how YouTube works these days. Over the last year or so, I have talked to some folks who are more successful than me, who were in this position a few years back. And it's clear that I now have two possible choices. I could keep making bigger and better things, keep climbing the ladder, build a business, hire full-time employees, and end up as a manager. And that would be great for someone who isn't me, but I know I'm bad at that. And I'd hate every...
All right, everyone. So this week, we're going to talk about the trend of some of the biggest YouTube creators announcing that they are quitting YouTube in some capacity or another. That includes big names like Matt Pat and Tom Scott. We have a bit of insight in this area because we've done some in-depth interviews and ethnography with creators over the years. So let's talk about some of these things that we've learned. All right, Dee, good morning. How are you?
Good. You can really hear it in Tom Scott's voice there of just like, he doesn't sound like he's almost gotten burned out. He sounds burned out to me.
Yeah, that's kind of what I felt. And, it's interesting because I started seeing all these different YouTube channels saying stuff like, I'm going to quit, or I've quit. And it wasn't until I started looking at some of the larger ones and started listening to exactly what they're saying and what it is that really bothers them and why they're burning out, that it made a lot of sense because of the work that we have done, because of the research we've done with YouTubers, because the friends that we have that are YouTubers that kind of disappeared and stopped doing their channels, even though they were like amazing channels. And so I think it's really good that we're talking about this today because it is a real topic. And burnout is not just with creators and YouTubers, with a lot of people. And so there's a lot of signs of it. And I think you called it with his voice, his frustration, right? These feelings, you could almost feel the anxiety and kind of depression coming on from that conversation of feeling very tired and stuff. Yeah. So I'm glad we're kind of getting into it. So tell me, when you think about the creator economy and kind of what YouTube has done over the last, maybe it's been, when did they start? When did they start getting really big? Like maybe 2010, 2009 or something like that. What comes to mind? You've seen the transition through all these years. You've done research in this area. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I think we should frame it up before we even get too deep into some of this, why this stuff is happening, is I think the creator economy is really important. And one of the reasons why I think it is important is it is one of the few areas where someone can truly be a solopreneur or a very small business that does it all with the bootstraps, without investor money. You can just put together a channel, get some viewership, and really build essentially a business without the blessing of anyone else, which is nearly impossible in most under industries. Like you can't do it in tech. Or I shouldn't say you can't. It's incredibly difficult without taking some money from someone, without getting an angel investor, without getting a Series A, all that stuff. It used to be much more possible. Mm-hmm. In the past few decades, kind of the investors have, just not, there was some diabolical plot, but just gradually over time, they've kind of set things up so you kind of need them. So I think that's important to keep in mind, like one of the reasons why this is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because there was a research study that was conducted, a couple of them actually from bigger institutions, and they talked to younger folk over the last 10 to 15 years. And what they started seeing kind of build up over time was asking young kids like, well, what do you want to do when you get older? And a lot of people used to say stuff like, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a rocket scientist, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be, and they started saying, I want to be a YouTuber, I want to be a creator, I want to be an influencer, I want to be, important, in that capacity. And, and some of those responses were based around like, wanting to be famous or whatever it is. But like some of those responses were around exactly what you said, which is just I want independence, right?
Yeah.
You've said before, long time ago, we were talking about some other topic on the podcast and you had mentioned like, it felt like the only thing really holding back from the majority of the public going and working for themselves was literally health insurance. Like,
Yeah.
and as we get into a point where, we live in California, so they have things that cover California and stuff. As things get easier over time to manage stuff like health insurance and stuff like that, I think you will see more people want to be solopreneurs and to, be creators and stuff like that. But I will say, I was listening to the podcast with the Kelsey brothers, the football podcast,
The New
and
Heights
what
podcast.
yeah, New Heights. Yeah, it was really great. And one of the things that happened was uh, somebody wrote in and asked them, what are the top 5 apps on your phone? And obviously, within the top 5 apps was YouTube, right?
Yep.
And, I would say the same thing for myself, right? Like, I absolutely love YouTube. Something's broken, I go on YouTube. I need to learn something, I go on YouTube. I want to listen to cool reviews, I go on YouTube. It's a fantastic place. Like, it's one of the
Yes,
best, I don't even call it technology, but like best avenues for education that I've ever seen in my entire life.
it's true.
So I don't want to
It's
lose these
absolutely true.
creators, right? Because these creators are doing really wonderful things.
Well, I think it's one of the things is that we'll see that YouTube has gotten the lion's share of it, and maybe it will spread out over time. But
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons why this stuff is happening. So one of
Okay.
them, like you mentioned, is kind of the burnout. And what I think and I've talked to people, younger people, who are talking about getting into YouTube and doing that kind of work, and I have to let them know how much effort is involved because people don't really understand like the just kind of the process of creating videos. And we've done this. We've talked to people who are creators who are on like weekly release schedules and things of like scripting out, conceptualizing what their content was going to be, scripting it out,
Hmm.
recording it. I mean, you got to do all your lighting and cameras and audio setups to begin with, and that takes some work, and that takes a little bit of money, not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But then you have to edit it. You have to figure out kind of like how to promote it, and hashtag it, your release schedule, all these kinds of things, and it's the phrase I heard from a musician a long time ago. It's a fun job, but it's still a job,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of pressure. So there's also this. There's for a long time there's been the guidance that you hear of like you want to be successful in kind of this homegrown media space like podcasting or YouTube creating or streaming
Yeah.
to do it regularly. So that means weekly releases.
Yeah, no,
And
I 100% agree with you. I mean, the word burnout
yeah,
is actually a real term. Like, I don't, people joke about it and they're like, I'm burned out or whatever. But like, I did some research on it. And, it is really this idea of like being so tired and exhausted that you're starting to get frustrated and angry and all these types of things. It's a real thing. And when you even describe to me the editing, the setup, the schedules, the release videos, the everything that goes along with it, including the marketing, the legal, the accounting, I could feel my blood pressure go up because you and I run a business. We also
yeah,
produce content, right, for the business, which is a little different than what other people are doing on YouTube. Um, I could feel it because it's a lot, right? But imagine being a solopreneur where you don't have a Demetrius or a Bryan to help you when things are getting overloaded, right? You're just on your
yeah,
own figuring this out. It's a tremendous amount of work. And also, you're the star, right? So it's like, I can't just grab anybody off the street who's like talented and be like, oh, now sit here and do this because my followers are
hmm
basically looking for me.
yeah. That's an important point. You can't just hand it off to someone else, and we've seen this before with like Linus Media Group and stuff like that, where
Yeah.
he kind of is the brand, and he has some other people on there, but people go there, they expect to see Linus. And you mentioned kind of how they're on the hook for all these things, marketing, legal, accounting, all that stuff. A lot of times these are people who are not trained in that. It's not
Hmm.
somebody who's coming from an accounting background or a legal background. I mean, for us, thankfully, when we got to the point where we were like 20 something and starting to have to deal with contracts, looking back on my education, it was basically pre law. So I was able to look at contracts and say,
Hmm.
all right, I'm not a lawyer, but this is kind of what this stuff is saying.
Yep.
A lot, a lot of the people who are doing this, they're experts in other things, and they have to acquire those skills. Like it's like changing the tires on a running car.
Yeah, or acquiring the people that can help you, but that costs, right? So,
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
if you're
when
just
you're
getting your
starting
channel
out,
up, yeah,
you don't have that, and even acquiring those people is a skill. Because how does somebody who doesn't do accounting or doesn't do legal evaluate somebody's skills with that?
yeah,
That becomes tricky, and then they end up with people who might take advantage of them. or anything along those lines because they don't have a great support network.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's true. And one of the other things you had mentioned, when we kind of talked about this prior to the podcast, was this idea that, these YouTube creators have been pioneering a new profession. So they've all just been figuring it out as they go along. I mean, there's plenty of tools now
Mm-hmm.
that assist them, from editing tools to lighting to this and that to how to handle your revenue to all these different types of things. But it's all been, like you said, like improving the airplane as it's flying. And it wasn't like we figured
Yeah,
all this stuff out and then started YouTube. They've been pioneering
yeah.
a whole new area. And, for the longest time, I've always felt like YouTube is this place where you go where you have like these really unique thoughts and these things that you want to share, and you share them with the community, and then people can benefit from it. But I think it also turned into this thing where we were trying to like beat television. Like, meaning we were trying to say like, YouTube's going to have more views than the Tonight Show or this or that. And they're kind of two different mediums, but there's a lot of people that are really kind of in that space now of really trying to like keep up with traditional linear television.
I think that's something that kind of weighs on people psychologically also. You have all the
Yeah.
pressures that we talked about, and these are the reasons for burnout. But at some point, and we'll talk about this too, is as you scale up and become more successful, it
Mhm.
actually becomes less pleasant as opposed to getting more pleasant. It's more pressure instead of less pressure.
Isn't that true though for pretty much any profession though? As you
I don't
start
know.
to
I don't know.
grow
I'm
and
not entirely sure that it is. Like if you, I mean, if you are an entrepreneur, potentially yes. If you are, if you're an individual contributor within a tech company, probably not, right? If
yeah.
you're, if you're a dev or if you're a designer or something like that, and you don't really, not really interested in moving into like major management roles,
Mhm.
but you just like happy to be the cog in the wheel,
Yeah.
no, you probably find a nice, like comfortable place and stay there. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially when you're making all this money off of RSUs and things.
Yeah, but the other thing too is like what I've heard is like now, I mean that was fine a while ago, but now the post COVID and stuff, a lot of this has changed now where like they don't really like individual contributors feel like they could be cut at any moment, right? Because they're not handling more and more and more. And so I imagine that like the anxiety of that, even when you're enjoying your career
Mm-hmm.
and doing your thing, is kind of weighs in. Just like as a creator, it probably weighs in if like you typically drop a video and get a million views, and suddenly you're getting 200,000, and you don't know
Sure.
why that's happening, and you're like, well, does this mean that like I'm on the decline?
Sure, but I don't know that the fear of getting laid off for something within the tech industry is a result of of being in it and being successful
Yeah.
as much as it's just a sign of the times, and they overhired for a while and now it's time to they're looking to cut a little bit.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh,
That's true. Let's talk a little bit about revenue too.
yeah, so
Let me just tell you. The assumption is that if you're a YouTube creator, you make millions and millions of dollars a year, and you're just like living like a king. Is that true?
not necessarily.
Okay.
There are plenty of people out there who've done very, very well and they make quite a bit of money, but that is not always the case. So I saw somebody who was an experienced creator put this out there that there for if you get 100,000 views on a video,
Mhm.
there is an estimated return of about $500 in revenue for that creator.
100,000 views. That's actually a lot
Yeah,
of human beings.
it is. It is a lot of human beings. Now, if you are doing weekly videos and they're averaging $100,000 or 100,000 views, $500 a video, that comes out to about $24,000 annually.
You can't even live off that.
Yeah,
So,
this is a full time job,
yeah.
but
Well, I
basically,
heard you
in order
make a
to do
lot
that.
more on sponsorships. Like where like,
Hmm.
you have your ad revenue, whatever, from your channel, but like when you get a call from, I'll make up some random name like Starbucks coffee or something like that. They'll be like, "Oh, we'll pay $5,000 a month in order to talk about Starbucks at the beginning and end of every video." And that's kind of where the money comes in, is this dispersion of revenue
Yeah.
across different things.
Yeah, so you'll see this as a trend, right? You started seeing sponsored videos and like within the tech space, you'll see, somebody sent me this thing from Temu or Amazon or whatever it was, or this small creator, and I'm going to review it, and it's a sponsored video. And people complain about that because, or I've seen people complain about that because it calls into question maybe that person's kind of independence and whether or not it's going to be a biased video, but there's a reason why they're doing it, and it's not because they're just greedy. Same thing with the affiliate links and things like that.
Hmm.
they're turning to other ways of bringing in revenue
Mm-hmm.
because the YouTube A is not enough, and B, it's unreliable because if you start getting some stuff demonetized, sometimes through no fault of your own,
Mm-hmm.
then then that becomes unreliable revenue, and you can't really have that if you're going to try to live on it. So they're turning to Patreon with additional value upsells. They're turning to affiliate links. They're turning to sponsored videos. They're turning to other platforms in order to kind of to smooth things out and gain
Yeah,
the majority of the revenue.
and that adds in more work, right? Because now
Yeah,
you're handling Patreon, now you're handling affiliate links. Like I did a test where for 6 months I signed up for Amazon affiliate links. I have a private website that has to do with camping or whatever. And I turned it on, and then I started posting blog posts and then driving people there, and then like saying like, hey, here's my affiliate links for Amazon for products that I recommend, that kind of stuff. And I monitored it and watched it, and then kind of like worked with Amazon to kind of see like what actually happens. And I did make money off of it. I made up
yeah,
$1.80. Um, but what I'll tell you is that was really interesting from it is that Amazon basically says if you don't make a certain amount of money, we're going to turn you off. So you have to make a certain amount of money
yeah,
over a certain period of time. I think it was like 6 months, and then after that, they just kind of turn it off, and that adds like a layer of stress because you're kind of thinking to yourself, okay, I have these different revenue channels, and I'm trying to build up this one, but it's not really going. But now there's a time limit and a clock on it,
yeah,
and so you're trying to also manage that as well. And so it is.
yeah,
I could see it. It's being very stressful, especially if
yeah.
you're doing it alone. Especially if you're doing it
And
alone.
if you imagine doing any of this stuff alone, I mean, we were a partnership when we started out. And the idea of doing what we've done solo just
It wouldn't
seems
work.
borderline impossible.
It's impossible. If we did what we did alone, like where we're actually like supporting clients, it wouldn't be possible. I mean, you'd have to work like 18 hours a day by yourself, and then you'd probably go insane. So it's just not, and it wouldn't be fun either. I'd rather work with a team,
Yeah,
than work
yeah.
by myself and do this.
Yeah, so the other thing to keep in mind is that as you're turning to things like sponsorships, those are legal contracts that you have to go through.
Hmm.
So you have to manage those contracts. It also changes your production schedule because a lot of these companies they ask to see the video before it's released and those
Hmm.
kinds of things. So either you have to tell them no, or you have to get the video out with enough time for them to provide feedback, which changes your weekly release schedule. Now you have to do everything quicker, and that just complicates the whole thing.
Do you feel like this was some of the insights that you got also when we worked with YouTubers, and we talked to them? Like, did you feel like
Yeah,
there was a stress from them about the monetization aspects of all these?
yeah, absolutely. Even for people who weren't reliant on YouTube as a source of income, it was still something that they were monitoring. It was
Hmm.
still, there's that stress of I need to be growing. I need to make sure that the amount of views and subscribers I have goes up and the amount of revenue I have goes up because, I'm in this for a reason. And I want to see growth. And that becomes, growth is something that people get addicted to. And we see it all the time, right? In our industries and other industries, even when they don't necessarily need growth, they reached a level of subsistence. They've gotten in order to get to that level of subsistence requires such a focus on growth that it's hard to turn it off when that focus on growth becomes potentially a detriment to your long-term health or the long-term health of your company.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's sad. Just talking to someone the other day who's, health is really like kind of taking a toll from the amount of
Hmm.
work that they're doing. And it's
Yeah,
like you look at it and you're like, yeah, you can't really take that one back.
yeah. And
That's the hard part.
we've also seen companies, plenty of companies, who kind of shot themselves in the foot by trying to live too far by focusing too far on their future as opposed to taking care of their right now. And you kind of have to do both. Um, but if you get too much into one realm or the other, then something's going to give.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I remember we were talking to one of the YouTubers and they were saying that, they got to a point where it was like their brain was never in the moment. I think you remember this conversation. It was like they're never
Hmm.
thinking about just enjoying themselves. All they were thinking about was, can I be filming the moment I'm living in?
Hmm.
And will that be good in the future for
Yep.
content? And they
Yep.
said, the hardest part about that is that like you don't really like you don't live in a real world. You live in this world
Yeah.
of like, well, am I saying and is what I'm doing actually going to help make me money? So you never get to just relax, or you feel guilty if you go out and you go do something, it ends up being an amazing experience and you didn't get it on video,
Yeah.
right? And it's like that's a weird place to live.
Yeah. And I've even heard like Kevin Smith talk about this, and he's big in podcasts, and I think he has his own YouTube channel and stuff now, where he said it got to the point where anytime I was doing anything, it came into my head, should I be filming this? Is this content that
Mm-hmm.
I can use? And he said the people around him started like pushing back and being like, can't you just like enjoy being here with your friends and family? And I mean, eventually he's been very public about this. He had like some mental health problems that he had to
Mm-hmm.
deal with. And that's something that I think a lot of people who kind of are living through this space are going to have to reckon with at some point.
Well, you're the cog in the machine, right? So
Yes.
the machine benefits from you feeling that way.
Yeah, it's
Right.
true.
A good point is like one of the podcasts or YouTube channels that I follow. Well, he has a podcast too, but YouTube channels that I follow is the Jamie O'Brien Experience kind of podcast. And he's a surfer and stuff. And what was really interesting, he used to do 2 a week, and I would watch both of them. And I remember thinking to myself, like, God, this is so much. I mean, this is 24/7. He's also, professional surfer. And so he's kind of doing this. And then I started noticing that the content toward the end, before he changed his format, started to feel almost the same. Like he couldn't come up with great ideas, or he was too tired to come up with a great idea for the Thursday drop compared to the Monday drop. And then suddenly he made this announcement like, we will not be doing two videos a week. We're going to do one a week, but we're going to do one amazing one.
Yeah.
And man, it is so much better. I mean, the production quality is like 10x. So every year he levels up his production quality.
Hmm.
It's like so much better every year. But then it's only once a week. So you see it and then you watch it and you go, that was an amazing episode. It's like watching a sitcom episode every Monday. And
Yeah.
it's like, I feel like he was smart to do that, even though the algorithm basically is like, we promote people who are on all the time versus just once a week. His choice to do that actually ended up driving his engagement up to has a million followers now. A million followers in the surfing community is bigger than I believe the World Surf League now.
Yeah.
So it's like he made a choice that was good for him, and that choice actually benefited everybody.
Which that is going to tend to be true, but it's hard to see in the moment. And this is true in other companies too. But at some point, if you can get your head out of being sunk into the moment and can take a different perspective, and you can take that 10,000-foot view,
Yeah.
then you can see, what will be better overall. And sometimes that's leveling up the product. And sometimes leveling up the product means shaking up your process
Mm-hmm.
and slowing things down in order to move faster. Uh,
Yeah. I
I've
mean,
seen it a lot with podcast. A lot of YouTubers I follow too. They reach a
yeah.
certain level and they seem to kind of their release schedule drops off, and I think they're less dependent on it at that point in time. But I also think that they're burning out a bit and need some space.
Well, I think it's smart. So to maybe a difference in my personality to like someone who's like crazily like obsessed about something. Like I've been
Hmm.
obsessed about things, but I think there's a part of my brain, I think it's like logic brain that says, there always has to be an end to something, and there always
Hmm.
has to be a leveling out. So like if you're at the point where you've made millions and millions of dollars on YouTube and you have all these followers, I fundamentally believe that if you told your followers, "Hey, I'm going to cut back to one a week," you enjoy, and you're willing to just decrease your revenue, you still have made millions of dollars that could have been invested and all that kind of stuff to like make sure that you're always taken care of. But the obsession of having to like win, 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 win all the time to the detriment of your health, when your followers would understand that
Yeah.
it's time to transition to something new. Cause like, life is about change, right? Like how many people do we know have changed jobs? How many people we know have moved? How many people we know have, quit industries and changed over the last 18 years that we've actually been running our business? We're like one of the few that have actually
Hmm.
stayed this long and actually kept the business going this long, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people have changed and just done other things with their lives, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. You got to be happy, right? You're only here for a
Yeah.
while.
Well, I want to give an example for disrupting the process. We've worked with people who brought us in, and they wanted to They wanted us to help them come up with their next big idea,
Mhm.
right? So that's a lot of what we do. We'll go out, we'll do ethno, we'll do interviews, we'll understand the users, figure out where the opportunities are in the market. But at some point, you need to take all that data back and kind of have and turn that into a product or concept, right? Concept first, then product, and making sense of everything that you've learned. One of the things that we found is that sitting in a meeting room, having ideation session after ideation session, is not nearly as helpful as getting outside and seeing things and doing things outside of the office. Like for
Mhm.
us, it was much better to go out and do ethno with actual human beings, spend time with them, and kind of get their perspective outside of like the confines of an office space than
Yeah.
it was sitting in a meeting room with five other product and design people, pouring over survey data and marketing data to try to figure out like, all right, what's the thing to fill out here? Like you get so much more insight and your mind is so much clearer by
Mhm.
being outside of that space.
Absolutely. I mean, it was interesting. Steve Jobs did an interview one time, and it was interesting. He was saying that he felt like, he went to a neighbor's house when he was younger, and the guy introduced him to rock tumbling, and he said like, oh, neighbor showed me like I put these rocks in, and they all look the same. The ones down the street that you find on the street, right? He said he put them in there, and then he put a little bit of grit in there, and the rocks bang up against each other, right? They create friction. Like it's like people, it's like bumping up with ideas. I have this idea, I have that idea. I did ethno. Like I think you're wrong. Blah, blah. And as it continues to grind in the grit and all that kind of stuff, something beautiful at the end usually comes out of it. And I agree with you. Like if everyone just sits in an office and someone says, "This is what I think we should do," and everyone goes, "That's great," and then they just kind of ideate lightly on that and move on, it's usually never great. It's usually like okay.
Yeah. It's
And
usually not
and
the
it,
great stuff.
no, it's not the great stuff.
It's the little things.
Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit also too about some of the problems that happen when a YouTube channel grows, because a lot of these YouTubers have talked about this, and we also learned it during our ethno of like what actually happens. Okay, so you start a YouTube channel, you're out getting views, you're kind of excited, people are writing comments, good, bad, ugly, whatever, and you're having this engagement, and suddenly it's growing and growing and growing, and you start to make money. Like, what are some of the things that kind of grows with the excitement of just producing the videos?
Well, you kind of start with focusing entirely on the videos. You're making the videos, you're putting them out. Maybe you're doing a little bit of cross promotion and marketing and stuff, but you're not doing a lot of legal. You're not really worrying about staff. You're not really managing partnerships or contracts or
Mhm.
HR or accounting and that stuff because there's not that much to take account of. As you grow and you start having sponsorships, that means every sponsorship needs to be managed, right?
Yeah.
They all have contracts, they all have communication going back and forth, they all have they're basically all project managed in some way. Somebody's going to send you an email and ask for like, hey, what's the progress on this and that, and you have to respond to them. That adds to your workload,
Yeah.
and that also takes your focus away from the fun stuff, which is making the videos for a YouTuber. uh, so you end up having a higher workload, more things to work on, you're spread more thin, and a lot of times the solution is getting some help, getting some people in, getting some staff in. But that takes work too. Anybody
Mhm.
who's done any hiring knows how difficult it is to get somebody who is going to be good. And I don't want to bag on people. I'm not going to say like nobody wants to work. But if you're talking about bringing somebody in with specialized skills into a job where they're just going to get a paycheck, they're not going to get a lot of growth. They're not going to get the same level of recognition that they would get if they went to a major, Fortune 500 company, and they're not going to get equity in the same way that somebody would get like working in a tech company. You're not, it's going to be difficult to find people who are self-motivated in order to work within that space.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. Yeah. I started thinking about that when you were talking, because I was like, a lot of people are complaining that a lot of people don't want to work, or they don't want to work hard and stuff like that. I think that we've just kind of, as a society, to some extent, redefined what that looks like. I think that entrepreneurs and people who own businesses, they don't want to die. And so if you don't
Yeah.
work crazy number of hours and you're always thinking and pushing and trying new things, it kind of falls apart. But you can't really expect that of someone that you just pay to come in and
Yeah.
support you, right? I mean, you might get lucky and find someone amazing who just really wants to be part of the organization, so they work their butt off, or that's their kind of culture inside of their heart. Just like, if I'm here, I'm gonna work as hard as I possibly can. But like, I've definitely talked to a lot of people who own businesses online and offline that are saying it's just really challenging, that you have to do a lot of it yourself if you really want to make it. But it's like you said, I think it's a lot like founding a startup, right? It's like
Hmm.
founders, like being a YouTuber is like a founder. It's like you wear many hats, you have to do everything yourself. You're personally obsessed with growth and spend. You're trying to scale and all that kind of stuff. But when you bring in that support staff is literally going to do what you tell them to do within the confines of 8 hours a day. And that's pretty much it. And you have to be
Yeah.
okay with that, unless you're paying them in equity and you're saying like, hey, you know what? If it grows, we're all going to get rich off of this. So you might as well hustle and work your hardest. Right.
Yeah, there's a few trade-offs there, right? Like for one thing, it can be harder to find people because unlike in a startup space, people are getting equity. One of the reasons
Yeah.
why you join a startup as opposed to and you take less money up front than you would if you were working for, established tech company, something that's more corporate, is that you're getting that equity and you're getting that potential for that equity to grow, right? That's one of the reasons why you're basically deferring compensation through equity. So, that's why there's so many millionaires that were created through the Silicon Valley tech boom, is because so many of them were, early employees at a company that ended up doing well. I mean, we've known people that were, executive assistants who walked away with, tens of millions of dollars
Mhm.
because they were very early within a company. And it's not like they were some, rock star engineer or something. They were, rank and file kind of an employee. That is not something that you can really do that much within kind of the creator space. And one of the reasons for that is there's no exit really. Like if you are Mr. Beast,
Yeah.
you can try to sell that off. If you're Linus, you can try to sell that off. Mr. Beast channel without Mr. Beast or Linus Media Group without Linus, like the value tanks. The
Yeah.
value of your
So I
investment
I actually have
tanks.
some insight on this because I actually watched an interesting interview with Mr. Beast. I've watched a ton of them lately because I was preparing for this. And one of the things that he said was he got offered, he had to be a little coy about it because he didn't want people to figure out who, but he got offered over $1 billion to sell the Mr. Beast brand. So that includes Feastables, chocolate, YouTube channel, the entire thing. If he sold that for, let's say, $1 billion, he's like, why do I need $1 billion? He's like, I already have so much money. It's like, it doesn't really matter to me. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
but let's say he sold it. He said, I have to still work for them
Yeah.
because of what you said. He's like, they're looking for Mr. Beast. They're not looking for like some other beast person that's not Mr.
It's
Beast, right?
it's not like they're buying IP for like how to build the new smartphone, right? It's not something that is independent of you. That's what
Yeah.
it's not like you're building Twitter that then kind of lives without you. You don't need those founders in order for that to be valuable. But again, if you are if you're Tom Scott and you're hoping to sell off your YouTube channel and step away, well, once you step away, that channel doesn't have any value anymore.
But what
Or
about
at
selling
the
the
very least,
catalog?
it drops a lot.
Yeah, but what about selling the catalog? Like, for example, when Joe Rogan did his with Spotify, they were buying the old catalog as well as his new
Hmm.
content. I wonder if he could have sold his entire older catalog and just stopped podcasting, or does that not have value because eventually it tapers off? Right?
It probably does have some value, but like it's one of those things where we're talking about how people are pioneering this space and none of it's established.
Yeah.
It's not like you're the Beatles and you have this track record of album sales to establish what
Mm,
value does this have, right?
yeah.
So plus it's the internet. Who knows how many people have already ripped that stuff? So they already have free access to it. It would take some new math to figure out, okay, what is this person's back catalog got to be? And per the example of Joe Rogan, it's not like he had an exit. Like it's not like he
Mm-mm.
went off and retired. He's still doing what he's doing. The fact that he's still producing content is influencing the value on his back catalog. And if he stopped, I think that value of the back catalog kind of goes down,
Yeah. Yeah. I think so
which is the
too.
opposite of music, right? I mean, someone like Prince or Michael Jackson or John Lennon dies, that value goes up. I think with
Yeah.
the other side of things, Howard Stern, I don't know how much people are really looking to buy old content from like a Howard Stern catalog, for example.
Yeah, you look at what he gets paid in kind of his huge 50 million, $100 million contracts, when he resigns for 5 years here and there. It's a re-signing for 5 years. It's not like, hey, here's 10 million for your old catalog and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. Although with Howard Stern though, I guess with all of them, but like with Howard Stern, I kind of think that there's a possibility one day when he retires that some of that content will have value in the sense that
sure.
Sirius owns it and it's not on YouTube. Some of it's on YouTube, but for the most part, it's not on YouTube, and you can just go in there and listen to old episodes where he interviews people. I think the
Yeah,
interviews feel more like music to me. When you're interviewing
a little bit.
somebody, you're learning about them, and it's kind of like I still to this day send old interviews that were done of different people to other people. Like, oh yeah, did you see this interview in 2004? With Mark Cuban or whatever it is. I still feel like there's value there. It's not like music though, where you want to listen to it all the time. You just might go
Yeah,
back every once in a while.
but even if we're talking about the Howard Sterns and the Joe Rogans, it's not the same thing as the majority of YouTube creators, right? Their back
No.
catalog is going to be much more difficult to try to sell.
Yeah, if anything, I wonder if some of these YouTube creators that are getting burned out can band together and actually build a company around it and just like kind of like lump multiple channels together and kind of bring. So here's the thing: Dave Ramsey's show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's his finance show. So he does really well. He does about $300 million a year on his show, and he also offers an educational program about how to handle your finances and all this kind of stuff. Well, he was doing an interview on the Iced Coffee podcast, I think it's called. And one of the things he said on there is he said, look, I cannot be the only thing that keeps this company going. I'm getting older now and that kind of stuff. So he said, I've brought in other people and I'm promoting their shows on my channel. Like they work for his organization, but he said, we're promoting more of them and slowly pulling me back to see if we can keep the subscribers to really love these other commentators or educators or whatever you want to call them, so that one day when I'm not here or I decide to retire or anything like that, then the company and the channel and all of it continues to flow because they like all of us, all five of us. It's not
Yeah,
just me. And I think that's pretty smart. But he said it's a real hard turn, like
it
five
is.
to 5 to 8 years of introducing other people other than yourself in order to slowly peel yourself out of that experience, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the Tonight Show thing when you're going from
Yeah.
previous host to Johnny Carson to Jay Leno and things like that. It's a rough transition. It is a rough transition when it's the Daily Show or it's the Tonight Show or something
Mhm.
like that. It's an even more difficult transition if it's like the Seinfeld, right? With
Yeah.
Seinfeld without Seinfeld,
Yeah.
or Roseanne without Roseanne. That is a much more difficult transition, and it's we've seen it happen before. I have yet to. It's again, it's rare, and they always take a hit.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's going to be that is with major marketing dollars on network shows, right? It's a little again more difficult when it comes to YouTube when it's like by kind of definition, unless you're like Mr. Beast himself,
Hmm.
then it's by definition a small business and
I
you've
feel
got a
like
small amount of employees.
the analogy there that's probably really good is Mr. Beast and Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Beast is kind of like the Jon Stewart of the Daily Show. Like, if you want to transition Mr. Beast out, I mean, he's got some great people that work for him that I see regulars on his channel, right? He
Hmm.
could probably make it happen, but I think it's going to be like a long stretch where, like, I didn't even, I used to love watching The Daily Show. I thought it was really funny and stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't want anybody else other than Jon Stewart. Like I felt like Jon Stewart did such a good job and I liked it. I liked him and it felt comfortable, right? Um, but Trevor Noah came in and then I ended up loving that. But he had a hard first year.
Yeah, they took a hit with viewership and everything
Yeah.
else, and it wasn't the same show. It was still a
No.
very good show, but it was
Yeah.
different,
It was
and that was
different.
something. I mean, they probably would have had an easier time if they had brought in Stephen Colbert, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Colbert had his own show, he had his own audience, but I think A didn't want to give up on that, and B he ended up going off to was it NBC and taking over that
Yeah.
with the Late Show.
He took over
So
Letterman's spot, basically.
yeah, but and again, it's hard. There are ways to do it. It might be something that creators can kind of lean on at some point. I don't know that it's going to be ever going to become like the the standard method. It's going to be something that maybe every now and then somebody's going to be able to pull off.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, let's get back into talking a little bit about how we can kind of solve for this problem, or some
Mm-hmm.
ideas that you have. What are some of the ideas that you have for helping solve for this problem, helping kind of keep these YouTubers engaged, but maybe they have to take breaks, or like, how do we handle that?
Well, I think one thing that can be really helpful if there are some service companies that are directed specifically for creators, something like what Salesforce does for companies, or for
Mm-hmm.
what Shopify does for online retailers and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But a company that, or Angie's List kind of thing, even, right, where it's like, hey, here you can get some kind of feedback and rating, and a way to find people who can do something for you on a per contract basis.
Yeah.
So that could be something where they can go to this resource, and it's a trusted resource, and people, they're all people who understand the specific specificities of that creator business, and you can get legal help, you can get accounting, maybe you can get editing there, you can get HR help, all the stuff that you might need to offload so you can be more efficient as a creator, through a trusted source that has some like a feedback mechanism, and it has like established pricing so people are ready to go.
What would you say about YouTube offering these services? Like, I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, I was thinking the more that YouTube as a company offers to its creators, they hit a certain tier, and then suddenly they start handling a lot of these things. And they say, don't worry about legal, don't worry about accounting. Well,
Yeah,
and they kind of handle the accounting in the sense that they tell you how much money you made. They send, your tax documents and stuff. But like, what
they
if
give you the tools.
the tools, but like, what if they handled more of it and took a lot of that pressure off? Do you think it would can help engage creators more, and keep them on the platform?
Potentially, I think there's a bunch of issues with that. Number one, there's a conflict of interest, right? What if somebody doesn't want to be on YouTube as much? What if they want to be on Twitch more? Is there
Yeah.
like a conflict of interest there? If they're coming through YouTube and they have like an IP dispute with YouTube, does that put
Hmm.
whoever that person is, whether they're accounting or whether they're legal or something else, does that
Hmm.
put them in a position of a conflict of interest?
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is, you know what, you not to be too negative, but this isn't the strength of YouTube or Google, right?
Hmm.
YouTube and Google's ultimately their strength is in data, in managing, organizing, making sense of data. They are also good at software.
Hmm.
They're not great from what I've seen at like some kind of a service company. Like not
Yeah.
not really.
It's also a big ask, because you're adding an entire wing or division of the company that has to handle
Mm-hmm.
service stuff, and service stuff requires service calls and
Yeah.
there's just a lot to that. But we also talked a little bit about like better relationships between YouTube and the creators in relation to like the DMCA stuff, and
Yeah.
all that. Like, how do you feel about that?
So we didn't talk a ton about the DMCA stuff and the IP stuff, but
Hmm.
YouTube hasn't handled it very well. Like anybody can, you know, any Joe Schmo anywhere in the world can apparently submit a DMCA, and YouTube will just be like, "Oh yeah, okay, you must be the rights holder because you're submitting this," and I'll just demonetize this or take it down and give people a copyright
Hmm.
strike. There was a game company, forgetting which one it was, but they actually had to sue YouTube because they were they were getting their own videos taken down, because somebody somewhere was submitting DMCA claims, and YouTube was and the company was basically saying like, hey, by letting them take down our videos, you're assigning them copyrights that they don't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that became a big issue.
Yeah.
So that's something that they need to figure out. They need to have some level of validation or verification whenever somebody submits a DMCA claim. They need to have a better way of handling. Like for example, I've heard of people using copyright free music in their videos. We use that in our podcast
Mhm.
even, and people are make 20, 30, 40 videos with some of this music in the background, and then the artist says like, oh no, I changed my mind. So now if you want to
Yes.
continue to use that, then you have to pay me. And now that person who created that video is just like, well, I just got like 20, 30 different videos demonetized or something like that because this guy changed his mind after the fact. That needs to
Hmm.
get ironed out for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of our videos that went up and something that said copyright on it. And I went and checked it and it said copyright is totally allowable because, we do like 10 seconds of something just to kind of like start up the podcast. And it said it's allowed because it was allowed by the creator.
For use.
Yeah,
Oh,
for use.
the
Yeah.
creator was okay with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so everything got pushed through, but like every once in a while, stuff like that does happen, and I kind of think that like it's gotten better over time. Some areas, obviously, creators would say not as much, but like as we move into the new wave of AI, I think that if we can dial it in and make a really really functional tool that can actually help with that type of stuff that you're talking about, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's where it gets smoothed out. Because you're talking about millions of videos, a lot of stuff happening in the moment. It can't be handled by humans all the time, so you have to actually use algorithms and stuff in order to kind of like weed out what is easy and what isn't and
Yeah,
that kind of
and
stuff, but I think it'll
they've
get
been
better.
using an algorithm, and that I would consider that AI that needs to improve,
Yeah.
and there needs to be better human support behind some of the stuff. As far as like, you can't take this down; it's my own IP, and
Hmm.
they should be able to take a look at it and say, or have a human step in and say like, oh no, it wasn't. You're right.
Yeah.
It's your IP. I've heard of YouTube creators who said like their video got demonetized because they thought that they were underage and they were like 35 because the algorithm took a look at it and said like, oh, this person looks like they're 15. So that is another thing that needs to be improved on from the
We
YouTube
actually got
perspective.
shut down on something one time. I don't even think I told you, but it basically said like, it was like copyright infringement, and I was like, but wait a minute, like D and I were the ones who actually said that, like meaning there was no music, no nothing. And so then I did that whole like send it to support. And the minute I sent to support, within like 5 minutes, it was like, oops. And then it just brought it all back up
Yeah,
again. And I was like,
yeah, and I mean, for us, because we've been working in this industry and we've worked with Google a bunch, we can reach out to someone and say like, hey, can you ask somebody to take a look at this?
yeah,
And and eventually they might, but like for somebody who's on the other side of the world, that's a completely different thing.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think this was kind of a good kind of analysis of this. I think, if we summarize kind of like what we're looking at before we kind of give some predictions here, is I really think that what's happening right now is people are burning out. We're starting to see the effects of that. And I think the algorithm has to adapt to it. It has to say, hey, you know what? This is a really good creator. And just because that creator says I'm gonna do one video a week that maybe is an hour long versus like two 30-minute videos, there should be a lot of value behind that because they have a lot of followers and they're making better quality content. And I think if it can accommodate for that, I think the creators would be a lot happy. I'm sure there's other things that creators don't like or whatever. But like just to kind of like go into like my prediction real quick here, I actually think YouTube's going to step up. They always do. I think they're going to figure out a way to solve this problem. I think they're going to make it better for the creators. I think this is one of those rub points. This is one of those uncomfortable moments where they're starting to see people get tired out over the last decade and that kind of stuff. And we're going to have to find a way to smooth it out. It just seems like something that YouTube would handle because they have handled a lot of issues in the past.
So my prediction when it comes to YouTube specifically is a little bit less positive. Like, I love the
Uh-huh.
people there. I think they're all good and well-meaning people. But for as long as this problem is not their problem, it's the creator's problem, I don't think they're going to address it. So I don't think that YouTube itself is going to change when it comes to being more open to or fixing the DMCA problem or uh, getting a little bit more communication and clarity about the algorithm. I don't think they want people to know the algorithm because they don't want people taking advantage of it. They want it to
Hmm.
just kind of happen naturally, which ultimately we know that's not how it works, right? Um, we have once there's awareness of the algorithm, you're in the observer effect. There's no way around that.
Yeah,
What I
no, that
do
makes
think will
sense.
happen though is that the YouTubers and the other creators are going to find some workarounds. They're going to uh, I think they're going to have some of these support systems start to spring up more. I think you're going to see a little bit more of like a mentorship program. I think for creators, so that if people get in, they can go to these groups and get some guidance. I think you might see a competitor to YouTube eventually pop up. I've been saying this for a while, and it's crazy to me that it hasn't happened. People decide they want to make Quibi instead. But
Yeah.
I think that if you can have somebody who is a little bit more creator friendly, what you'll end up seeing is people will build their audience on YouTube. So they'll build their following because that's one of the things that YouTube is really great at. And then they'll go to this other platform that is a little bit more creator friendly in order to be the established brand. And then it'd be like, the Oakland A's serving as the farm system for other teams in the MLB.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, we haven't seen a real competitor. I mean, there are quote unquote competitors, but they just really don't kind of touch YouTube and its brand, and it hasn't for a long time. So it will just kind of elevate everybody because it would make everybody step up and maybe even pay bigger shares, to the creators. But it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. But yeah, this was fun. All right, everyone. Well, we are going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. We really appreciate it. We'd love it if you can write a review for us, leave comments, subscribe to us on our YouTube channel at the X Podcast. It means a lot to us. So, all right, everyone, thank you very much, and we will see you all next week.